Hello all. In this video I'll be reviewing this Enjoywood router coping sled kindly sent to me by Banggood. Like the Hongdui T-Square I reviewed recently, this coping sled has had some input from the chap at the Hooked on Wood channel. How much input I can't say, but as you'll see if you keep watching, this sled has a couple of features I think set it above the competition, but also a couple of annoyances that make some in-use operations a bit of a chore. So let's get into it and see what it's about. So first off, it's packed really well. This box you see was actually inside another thicker cardboard box. Inside, cut foam keeps all the parts protected and separated. From the accessories, to the hardboard sacrificial strips and the clear perspex blade cover, to the clamps and finally the substantial sled slab itself. The sled comes with chunky handles, position dogs and cover mounts pre-fitted to the top. Underneath, the standard 19mm mitre bar and anti-friction strips. Clamps removed from their foam layer, the stainless steel posts can be slid on. The fixing screws for mounting to the sled can be found already in the bottom of the posts. Going in a bit closer, you can see cut aside, the sled has a 4mm rebate for the sacrificial hardboard extensions. Two of these hardboard blanks are provided, but hole spacing is conveniently marked on the sled and full dimensions provided on the product page. These, once trimmed, will give you an edge perfectly matching the cutter, and you could make a whole bunch for the different cutters you use. These 4mm hardboard ones do float 5mm above the tabletop though. I make my own full depth 9mm plywood ones later, something I recommend doing. Screws for attaching these are supplied and even an extra one thrown in. 4 stubby stainless steel dogs are fitted which provide for 90° machining and diagonally between 2 for 45° machining. Unlike with a fence, if your workpiece is shorter than the space between the dogs, you'll have to use something as a fence, another thing you'll see me do towards the end. But kind of annoyingly, there's no other dog positions than you see them in now. If I remove one, you'll see that the dog sits in its own recess. I mean, I get it, this and the countersink below ensures accurate seating and position, but this arrangement is somewhat limiting. There are 1 or 2 hole positions meant for the clamps which seem to fall perfectly in line and could close the gap for shorter workpieces, but not sure I trust its reliability compared to the machined housings in the holes actually meant for the dogs. Through its centre, each dog has a grub screw for refining a cut, maybe if you're trying to refine a cut by a ½ degree or so. The mitre bar has 3 mounting positions, these holes showing the other 2. It also has the usual plastic split washers for eliminating play in the track. Adjustment for these accessed from above via the holes just inside the bar's fixing screws. 3 Allen key sizes are needed for everything on the sled by the way, and all 3 are supplied. The stainless steel mounts for the protective guard have knurled thumb screws. One side of the guard has counter bores to seat nicely on the mounts. I will say about the guard that, nice an inclusion as it is, in the 2 weeks I've been using this sled I haven't once used it or felt the need to. I prefer having a clamp over to that side to secure work, as close to the cutter as possible, but if you want it, it's there. A generous number of holes are provided for the clamps. All seem to have had forethought into where you'd have them in relation to the dogs, 45 or 90°. I can't help but think there'd be a better way to mount these clamps. Maybe if the thread was machined into the bottom of the clamp posts. As it is, it's just a bit fiddly to line up the screw and set in place. Once in place, the clamp posts do feel solid. At the back of the clamp body is a thumb screw allowing you to lock in place at a particular height or just leave them loose. Now I have to admit, given the plastic body of these clamps, my expectations weren't high, but honestly, the clamping pressure, or at least the grip from these things is just incredible. They hold fast yet the lever action is easy. Just to explain my setup here in case the orientation disorientates you, for the sled I'll be using one of the T-tracks for my table saw fence. So the sled will be running across rather than along the router table insert plate as would be more normal. At my request, Banggood did send me a couple of these junction pieces for the T-track, but I haven't yet found the time to make the required table extension. I'll hopefully cover that in a future video. Before making the first cuts, first thing to do is get rid of the play between mitre bar and track. Just like you would with your mitre gauge, a quarter turn or whatever of the split washers should sort that out. All being well, you'll hit that sweet spot of perfect slide with no side to side play. To test it then, really, we only need to know 3 things. Can it hold work properly in place? Can it cut a reliable 90°? And can it cut a reliable 45? The 2 angles it provides for. Here I've a piece of 26mm MDF I've squared at the table saw. It's actually cut square both sides and at each end, but for the sake of visual reference, I'll mark this corner as the one we'll be referencing. Checking I'm fully against the dogs, I clamped down. I quickly became impressed with these clamps. I've got a 12.7mm spiral compression bit in the router for the cut, and the work position to machine about 2mm off the edge. That was very smooth and steady. That's just perfect. Actually given me a much cleaner face with that compression bit than the cut with the table saw. And being gripped so well by those clamps was a safe and reassuring cut too. Satisfied with the basic 90 degrees, I set up for the 45. For this, it means moving the clamps, and again I find myself just a bit miffed that swapping them out feels a chore. I've ripped that same piece of MDF into some strips. Sat at 45 against the dogs, I locate where I want the clamps, then screw them on. See what I mean about it might have been better if the thread was at the bottom of the clamp post. Anyway, everything in position, I've set for an aggressive cut to try and mill the 45 in one pass. The shaky table there was me not realising I still had the thing up on its wheels at this end. Silly boy. I got that far into the cut before I thought better of it, with this router bit anyway. They are meant for clean up passes rather than brute force hogging, and probably explains why it's vibrating a lot. I move the workpiece back and try for a couple of passes or so. Even though that second pass was quite shallow, I'm still getting a fair bit of chatter. I think it's happening here because it's a strip overhanging the sled rather than the slab it was when I was doing the 90. For the time being, I persisted until this final finishing pass, the shallowest yet, still chattering. Despite the chatter, it did still turn out square across its section and present as 45. The cut face was smooth too, but I want to give it a good chance. As mentioned at the start, this rebate up front is to mount the supplied sacrificial hardboard pieces. These being only 4mm, they'll leave a gap underneath, which I don't think will help too much with the chatter problem on soft material like MDF. Instead, I managed to find a piece of 9mm ply from which I'll make my own full depth sacrificial pieces. Not only are the hole spacings etched into the sled itself, but the product page on Banggood features an image with the full dimensions. From those dimensions, I ripped down the 9mm ply, which gave me enough for 3. Using a digital height gauge, I got a reading of 4.55mm for the lip. I used that to set my router bit height. I'm using a 22mm wide router bit, so one pass is fine at this depth. A quick check and the rebates overlap absolutely perfectly. The ply though does sit a fraction of a millimetre proud of the top of the sled. I noticed this before I machined it, but now's the time to take it to the planer to knock off a couple of tenths. The difference is so little from the 9mm ply to the sled that if you don't have a planer thicknesser, a couple of back and forths with a random orbital sander would achieve the same ends. Regardless, these ones seat just so now. For the hole positions, rather than use a diagram, I just template from the supplied strips. Then, taking care to choose the best camera angle possible, I drill them out. Then, with let's face it, a slightly improved camera angle, piece flipped over, I countersink. Excuse for the wobbly table this time, being this drill sits on a sustainer stack. Sustainer stacks are always comedy gold when you need a stable surface. Anyway, I did this for all 3 strips I cut from the ply, so although you'll see me butcher this one, I have the other 2 and a couple more I'll probably make that I'll eventually match to specific cutters. At some point, hopefully, I'll have a whole set for different tasks. As my first task here will be going back to milling 45s with this spiral compression bit, I trimmed down the strip to that first. Same sort of thing you'd do for a plunge saw guide rail. In case anyone wonders why I'm not flushing up the whole strip length, it's because until I do my table extension, the split washer in the mitre bar below is in danger of running out of the T-track. With the first 45 piece back on, I set about recutting its face, listening for chatter. I hope you heard, or rather didn't hear, that too. The full depth ply strip appears to be doing its job, providing adequate support underneath, eliminating the chatter. Well happy with that, I set about creating a second piece at 45. While I do, I should say that the chatter issue is not only due to the comparative softness of the MDF, but also because my T-track near edge is some 200mm from the bit centre, pretty much the extent of the sled and strip's intended reach. Should your tracks be closer, this effect would be minimised, with or without the full depth strips like mine. Final pass on the second 45 piece, and you can make out that as the strip edge is flush to the bit, it's very easy to align the final pass to the edge in this case, equally a line or a mark. The two 45s go together seamlessly, making a perfect 90 inside and out, although for some reason I didn't film checking that. But you'll see me do that shortly, as I want to do more with these 45s yet. I have here one half of a pair of router bits. This one cuts a mortise, the other the tenon. These two supplied by Banggood for review. My thinking that these sort of bits would be a good companion for the sled, but I'll talk about all these router bits in a separate video. As well as a cutter for the mortise, the bit has cutters above and below to cut shoulders. I've already done a trim pass for the ply sacrificial strip, so I set the workpiece so it slightly overhangs the ply so the bit can cut both the mortise and recut the shoulders. It's this sort of task the sleds are perfect for. This then is the partner bit for cutting the tenon, the same but opposite. Again, I've already done a partial pass with it to trim the ply back. I set the position so the router bit's central cutters also contact the work. This should ensure a perfectly matching mortise and tenon. The mortise and tenon cuts worked out nicely, but like I said, I'll talk more about that in another video. The test here really is the 45, and I'm happy to report it's perfect. Checked for square inside and out, they create a perfect 90. A great workshop accessory for doors and frames, no doubt. The join, despite a little furring from being freshly cut, meets very well. No strange micro gaps or racking when put together. So what you've seen here isn't the only tests I've done. I've been using it a lot with other bits Banggood sent me, and while my experience with the router bits has been mixed, the sled, to be honest, has performed very well. I should note too that in almost all my other use of the sled, I was machining hardwood and didn't experience the issue of chatter we saw with the MDF. The solidity of the hardwood seemingly making the overhang a non-issue. As I've hopefully demonstrated though, if this were an issue, or you want to play on the safe side, it becomes null if you make some full depth ply strips to support the work underneath. The 4mm hardboard strips supplied, it strikes me, would only be good for providing accurate cut line once trimmed. They'd do very little for support. This ability to make and attach strips to zero to the cutters appears, after a quick search of coping sleds, a unique feature to this Enjoywood sled, and one I'd say is a brilliant one. Another brilliant feature, making this sled worth considering, is the clamping system. On premium sleds like this Woodpeckers, or this basically the same UK version from UJK, the clamping system positions along profile lengths and then is basically screwed down. Or you might have seen something like this no-name one with toggle clamps. Both these type of systems work fine, the screw downs in particular, but they can leave an impression in work if over tightened. You could add a protective piece of wood if that's the case, but with the clamps fitted to this Enjoywood sled, clamping action is quick, is very secure, non-marking, and with the lever cam system, there's no room for over tightening errors. I've been so impressed with these clamps actually that I've ordered myself a pair of the MFT 20mm hole compatible versions with my own money. As mentioned earlier though, repositioning the clamps is a bit of a pain. One I can live with, but they'd be more user friendly if they had a thread at the bottom to screw directly into the substantial aluminium slab that makes up the sled. I should mention that if you have mitre track with a 19mm slot on your table saw, this sled can be used there too, particularly useful on 45s. Sometimes using a mitre gauge, there's a very slight drag effect from the blade at angles like 45, where the blade will slightly pull the work in or push it out as you make the cut. This can leave your meeting faces not looking the sharpest. Being able to clamp the work on the sled would help, providing work holding something akin to cutting on a sliding table saw. With its mix of solid aluminium and stainless steel where it counts, overall quality is impressive, and the machining and finish equally so. My main gripe though is with the dog system they've chosen, even if they're good quality and offer micro adjustment. For 90 degrees, there's no real issue. However, imagine doing this 45 tenon cut, but using a flute rather than the purpose-made cutter I used. Because there's no other position offered for the dogs, when you flip the piece to mill the other side, you're right at the rear of the sled. Depending on the width of your workpiece and depth of tenon, a potentially significant overhang, unsupported. On my table, it had also run out the front split washer on the mitre bar from the track, even going across the table rather than along as I am here. Fine, might not be an issue if your router plate is in a large table, but most router tables have fairly small tops. It needs a couple more dog holes up front for this type of scenario in my opinion. Unfortunately, none of the clamp holes in this area align at 45, so there's no scope for blagging it. Another limiting factor with the dogs is if you have a workpiece that falls between the dog spacing. Here you can see I used a piece of alley profile against the dogs and placed the work against it. The profile fence also provides the option for some sort of flag stop for repeat cuts, as is available on the UJK and Woodpeckers, not something provided for by the dog system. You can see here I set up a position stop cut side instead. What this sled has going for it though is the excellent clamps and the ability to fix support right up to the cutter via 9mm ply, along with its general quality and at present its price. And on that point, now, or maybe even from Tuesday the 3rd of September, is a great time to buy if you've been considering this or a coping sled more generally. With a claimed recommended retail price of £146, it's currently selling on promotion for £84.72 with free UK shipping within 5 days from its UK warehouse. On Tuesday the 3rd of September, 20 of them only will be available at £81.64. That's incredible value considering the price of coping sleds, let alone one this quality. The current promotion and the flash deals from Tuesday the 3rd of September will be across most of their stock, so good a time as any for a bit of a bargain hunt. I'll leave a link to the sled in the description below if you want to take a closer look. I'll leave a link to the standalone clamps similar to the ones that come with the sled, along with a bunch of the router bits shown too. I'll have a video up hopefully by next weekend on those router bits. I attempted to make this little cabinet using just the router table and the supplied bits, so watch out for that. I welcome any comments or questions below. Please like the video if you did, subscribe if you weren't already, and as ever, if you made it this far, thanks for watching.